Well, I am Brooks Barron. I'm the Minister for Environmental Justice for the United Church of Christ. I'm especially excited about today's webinar for lots of reasons. We've got some terrific guests with us today addressing some very meaningful, very significant justice issues in our country. And so delighted to have our guests with us. And today is going to be unique for me because I have a new co-host for today. Michael Malcolm is traveling. He said he might try to join us somehow if you could get a connection from Tanzania, where he's at right now for a climate conference. But today we have with us Elizabeth Chonhe Lee, who is the executive for economic and environmental justice for the United Methodist Women. And I tell you, wherever I go in the country, I tell you, United Methodist Women are a force to be reckoned with. I experienced that as a pastor, experienced it this past week when I was in Evansville, Indiana. Wherever I go, UMW is there and a strong force. And so just delighted to have Elizabeth with us for this webinar. So we are going to get started here, and Elizabeth, you can go ahead and give us a faith framing for our topic today as we talk about ground zero in the environmental justice movement.
Thank you, Brooks, and good afternoon and good morning, everyone. It's a privilege to be co-hosting this webinar with Brooks, and also just really humbling because I'm taking place of Reverend Malcolm, and also with such an august group of speakers. And as we begin our time together, I want to recognize that generally a person cannot survive more than 2 months without food, more than 3 days without water, but air, a person cannot survive more than 6 minutes without air. And it is this air that we need, the breath of God that breathed into humanity, as is spoken about in Genesis. And this is the air that sustains us, that should be a right, but that has been poisoned and is poison to millions of people in the world and in the US. But that poison is not distributed equally. In the United States, it poisons more communities of color, low-income communities, the elderly, and in particular children. And as people of faith, we must not stand idly by. For those of us from the Christian faith tradition, yesterday we observed Ash Wednesday, and that began a time of repentance, a time of fasting. And I can't help but think about Isaiah 58 that speaks about the hypocrisy of religious activity and fasting, where we fast while we let oppression and self-interest continue. Isaiah 58, God says, "Is this not the fast I choose, to loose the bonds of injustice, undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free and break every yoke?" So a time of fasting is directly connected to a true form of repentance that is actively working to break the bonds of injustice. And that includes the oppression of fence-line communities who live near companies that are spewing out poison in the air that are known carcinogens. And this is why we at United Methodist Women, and with so many others like the UCC and those who will be speaking, have been focusing on air pollution, especially since those living in fence-line communities are disproportionately communities of color, low-income community, and children, and are being oppressed. And that's why today's call is so important. And as we think and as we hear from the speakers, I pray that we would be thinking about how we're incorporating what they're saying into our own faith practice, witness, and activism.
Great. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That was terrific. And I'm going to, before I introduce our panelists today, I'm just going to set some context. Yesterday, the United Church of Christ joined with others in the United Methodist building in DC to release a new report on toxic air emissions. And so I'm just going to share some of the findings of that report to help give us some context for today's call. Essentially, what the report did is it looked at data that had been submitted to the EPA from over 15,500 facilities across the United States that have toxic chemical emissions. And what we found in looking at that data was that there are 100 super polluters which are responsible for 39% of all the toxic air emissions that were reported in 2018, the year we're looking at this data. And so that's less than 1% of all the facilities in the country are creating this huge amount of toxic air emissions. And when we then look at those 100 super polluters, what we discover is that often they're clustered in particular parts of the country. The three clusters that we looked at in particular were Houston and were what's often called Cancer Alley, that stretch from Baton Rouge to New Orleans, and also part of Ohio near Lake Erie. So we looked at all of that, and the trends that we see throughout the country, and particularly in these parts of the country as well, is that the populations, as Liz just pointed out, more likely to be low income, more likely to be people of color. And what we did in this report is we also wanted to pay attention to children under the age of 5, because their small developing bodies are so vulnerable to toxic chemical pollution. And so we were able to know within a mile and within 3 miles how many children under the age of 5 are living near these facilities. And so that became really important to us. And what we realized is that throughout the country right now, there are nearly 113,000 children under the age of 5 who live within 3 miles of these super polluter facilities. And then within just a mile, there's nearly 12,000 children under the age of 5 who live near what we call the toxic 100 facilities. And so that really sets our moral compass at a time in which we're witnessing an administration that has sought to roll back 95 environmental protections. And so that's a big part of what motivates us. And just to share some things about Houston and Cancer Alley, the Houston metropolitan area experienced some of the highest amount of toxic air releases. There's over 411 facilities in the Houston area. And these emissions count for about 6% of all that's reported nationally. And then 10 of the toxic 100 facilities are in the Houston area. And so the state of Texas leads the way as a state with 17 facilities. Then we look at Louisiana. The state as a whole has 12 facilities within the toxic 100 list. We look at that and we see that there are 142 facilities in that stretch from Baton Rouge to New Orleans, that out of those, 4 of those rank in the top 10 of our 100 super polluters. And so all that's just part of the context of what we want to bring to you today. With that said, I now want to bring us to our speakers for today. We are going to start with Sharon Levine, who comes to us from an organization called Rise St. James. There's St. James as part of that stretch from Baton Rouge to New Orleans. And so Sharon has been frequently on the front lines of the struggle. She has a national reputation for her work. We're delighted to have her here. She is joining us by phone, and as she speaks, I'll share with you a photo of her that I found in one of the many news articles in which she's featured. And so, Sharon, we'll let you go ahead and take it away.
Okay. I'm Sharon Levine from St. James, Louisiana. I've taught school for 39 years. I started this fight against the petrochemical industry in 2018. As I was teaching school, my daughter called me to tell me that our governor, John Bell Edward, approved a $9.4 billion industry to come into St. James this industry is not quite 2 miles from where I live. It's a mile from a public school, and it's a mile from a Baptist church. When I found out about this industry coming in, I started to seek information. I started to do research. And when I was in an organization, they would tell me that whenever the governor approves something, the parish council usually go along with them. So they would tell me it was nothing we could do about it. And it was nothing we couldn't do anything to try to stop it, because once they approve it, that's it. That didn't fit well with me. As I prayed and I cried and I wondered how would I live in this community with another mega giant coming into my neighborhood. We already have 12 in a 10-mile radius in the 5th district in St. James Parish. And that worried me. It bothered me. I couldn't rest until I spoke to God and I asked God to tell me what to do. And he told me to fight. He put a fight in me that's beyond explanation. Ever since that, I started an organization in October of 2018. I didn't have a name for it or anything, but I invited people to come to my house to join. The first meeting I had in my home, we had 10 people. The next meeting I had was in my garage. We had 20 people. And it took off real fast. People started to join. They wanted to speak about it. They wanted to fight against it. They didn't know how, but they were glad I was doing it. And they commend me for what I'm doing, and they're telling me to keep up the fight because they don't want another industry coming into St. James, because we're already sick and we're already dying. We have people not far from where I live dying of cancer. I'm going to a funeral tomorrow. This man died of cancer. We had 3 last week died of cancer. We have 2 members of Rise St. James died. We had another member in the other organization that I had. He died. He lived right next door to the industry called New Star. So we've been fighting. The organization is growing. I've been on the road a lot. I've been speaking a lot. I've been speaking to attorneys, trying to stop this plant that's coming in. And we also found grave sites on the property that Formosa bought. And that's kind of like holding up a little bit because the state gave them all of their permits to build. So after we found the grave sites, that kind of put in a little hole on it. So we're hoping that the grave sites would be the thing that stopped this plant from coming in. We have grave sites of enslaved people that worked and slaved on that land. They lived on the land, they died on the land, and they were buried on the land. So we spoke to the head of the archaeologist department in Baton Rouge, and they are working on it also with us, and they are helping us. So that's where we are right now with the fight.
Thank you so much, Sharon. And we will have time later for questions and answers. I'm sure people have got questions. And thanks so much for telling your story about how you got into this struggle. It's very, very inspiring. Now I want to give Robert Taylor a chance to speak and to share with us. Robert is a leader within Concerned Citizens of St. John, another community within that Baton Rouge to New Orleans stretch. And he, again, I hope people appreciate, we've got some major leaders well recognized and respected for the work they've been putting in over the years. And so both Sharon and Robert, lots of regard for their work. Robert, I'll allow you to take things away and to share about the struggle that you've been engaged in. We're
I can't hear.
Robert, could you try to unmute yourself? Would that work? Or I can try to call you back.
Hello?
Oh, we can hear you now.
Hello?
we hear you. Great.
Okay, great. Again, my name is Robert Taylor. Born in this, I live in St. John Parish, adjoining parish to St. James. I'm about 30 miles upriver from New Orleans and about 40 miles southeast of Baton Rouge. So I'm right in the middle of what they call Cancer Alley, as well as St. James Parish. We're about center of that stretch. Anyway, I was born here in 1940. I've been here all my life. I built this home. I got married in 1963, and I was fortunate enough as a young Black man in a predominantly agrarian society. This is a sugarcane economy. And I watched it switch from agrarian to petrochemical to this industrial onslaught. Right here in Reserve, there was a plantation called Bell Point Plantation. When I was going to school, I had friends who lived on the Bell Point Plantation, which was in walking distance. And this is the site that DuPont purchased and built this plant and went into operation in 1968-69. They began construction in the year I got married in 1963. We didn't, the poor Black inhabitants of Reserve, of this area of Reserve, we didn't know what was being built, which was not uncommon because we were not a part of this society economically and even politically. But after years of living here, exposed unknowingly to the 29 chemicals they tell us that DuPont puts into our air. And they're allowed to dump them into the water, into the river. And worse, I think they do what's called deep well injections. They go down to the aquifer and they dump the poisons in those natural aquifers and water sources for us. In 2016, we were contacted, the people in St. John Parish, by EPA. They called meetings, emergency meetings, and they came out to Reserve. Reserve is centrally located in the parish, and that is actually where DuPont is. So they called a meeting, and they informed us that we were in a crisis situation, that we were being bombarded with this particular chemical, chloroprene, a likely human carcinogen, at levels that were unsafe. They notified the local authorities, the local government, the council, the parish president of this situation. And what they did as a result, because they said there was no place in St. John the Baptist Parish that had a safe level, what they consider safe, 0.2 micrograms per cubic meter. They determined that that was the highest amount that humans should be exposed to. They found no place in St. John Parish that met that requirement. Everywhere they went. And what we eventually discovered is that the closer you were to the plant, the higher was your rate of exposure, which is what resulted in the diseases, the sickness and sufferings and death that we suffered right here in Reserve in what EPA calls census tract. They divided the parish into census tracts. We live in census tract 708. EPA informed us in 2016 that we had the highest rate of expected cancer. We were more vulnerable than anyone in the United States. We were 780 times the national average. when our local health authorities was telling us that we were even with the national average, that we were not above the national average. Environmental Protection Agency came in and did their studies and informed us that we were almost 800 times the national average in risk of cancer. That was reflected in the rates of cancer the closer you got to DuPont. Stanford University came and did a health survey which proved that in their study, that proximity to DuPont increase your chances of dying from not only cancer, but numerous other maladies. And we're talking about one chemical here now. They emit 29 in that air there. I heard that lady saying that, and that struck me about our air. We don't have a choice. We've got to breathe air. These people are allowed to dump 29 chemicals in the air. What is the effect, not only the cumulative effect of years and years of exposure to this, but what happens when you mix all of these chemicals together? They produce other chemicals. And if they are allowed to dump 29 chemicals, what is happening to the people here? We have an elementary school that is 1,500 feet from that plant. EPA measurements of chloroprene show that that school was being exposed 400 to 700 times the 0.2 that they recommend as a safe level. DuPont argued with us, DEQ argued with us and said, no, it's not 400, it's only 50 times a safe level. That's their argument. But the measurements show differently. They have been forced to monitor the air and give us access to that data. And as we access the website and collected that data and start to distribute it in the community, that's when we came under attack. That is the organization that came out of that government meeting that night. I immediately contacted the pastor of my church, who was there with me. We contacted our councilman at large, and we began to organize. And in midsummer of 2016, I got a state charter on the Concerned Citizens of St. John the Baptist Parish, of which I am a co-founder and the executive director. So for 4 years now, in the next 2 months, it'll be 4 years, we have been petitioning and fighting and picketing and boycotting our government, the council, but especially the school board, who are in charge of the safety as well as the education of our children, to protect these 400 to 500 vulnerable children from kindergarten through 5th grade. Young people. We've just been informed a couple of weeks ago that the effects of chloroprene is 10 times on children and elderly what it is on an average adult. And children are being exposed daily, have been, with the knowledge of everybody, EPA, the state DEQ, our local government, and of course the school board, and they have just declared war against us. Our State Department of Environmental Quality attacked us. They attacked me, accused me of being a fearmonger and a troublemaker. They accused the organization of distributing misinformation and that we were just rebel rousers. And the director of DEQ stood before our council, and he repeated it before the school board, all being videoed to the people of St. John Parish to stay away from Robert Taylor and the Concerned Citizens of St. John, that we were troublemakers and rabble rousers and nobody should take us serious. I cannot believe that this happened over 3 years ago. This guy, and he's been going around the state using us as an example. This is the guy that's heading the organization that is supposed to be protecting us. He came before our council and said to them that DuPont is a great company and that they aren't doing anything that's harmful to the people, that we should be grateful for DuPont. And this has gone on since I've got in this struggle. The DEQ regulates or attempts to regulate the citizens of St. John Parish and the victims of DuPont. They are not regulating DuPont. We have evidence that there are 10,000 violations on the DuPont plant. And we've been trying to get the government to find out what is going on with that. 10,000 violations on a plant that is situated right in the heart of a poor Black community. They refuse, from the governor all the way down to the council person in St. John Parish. Our state representative, our state senator, we reached out to our United States Congressman, Congressman Richmond. Nobody has responded in a positive way to the poisoning of this community, but even more so the outrageous travesty that's being placed on these young children in this parish. Our fight has been, since we discovered that, is to at least have these children put in a safer environment. As a result of our work, the state decided to look at that. The state health department, along with DEQ and the school board, did an assessment, and they verified, yes, the children are being exposed at these high levels. Their reason for not relocating the children is that there is no safe place, that there's no place. This is their excuse, that there's no place in St. John Parish that doesn't have an unsafe level. Well, at the parameters, the farther you get from that plant, the lower is your exposure to this plant. They have facilities on a perimeter of the parish that's got levels that's only 2 or 3 times above. But they say they won't move them there. They let them stay where they admitted it is 50 times higher. But records show, the monitoring shows that it goes as high as 700 times. And so the fight goes on. I'm frustrated. I hope I'm not just rambling on and on. But thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Robert. We really appreciate your sharing. I know people have some questions. We'll get to that in a moment. Right now, I'm going to introduce us to our third and final person who will be sharing with us today. Like our first 2 panelists, Juan Paris is a person who has been a long distance runner in the struggle for justice, for environmental justice. For years, he has been fighting on the front lines in Houston. He is the co-executive director for Texas Environmental Justice Advocacy Services, also known as TEJAS. I recommend that if you go to Houston, you have TEJAS give you an environmental justice tour. I've experienced it. You see the world with new and different eyes after you have been on that tour. Juan, I hand things over to you so that we might learn from you. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, I didn't know if I was on mute or not. Well, thank you for inviting us, and I'm sorry I'm late to this conference call that you have. If there's too much noise, let me know and I'll try to move somewhere else. But let me ask you, I just heard your introduction. Exactly what do you want me to address?
Juan, tell us about kind of the situation that's faced in Houston this webinar with a number of people on the line that want to learn about what the struggle is, what the facilities are doing that are emitting all these toxic air pollutions, what Tejas' approach has been to addressing that. To give us an overview of the situation and the context and what Tejas has been about.
Okay, first of all, we're an environmental justice grassroots organization, and we have been here working in the Houston-Galveston area and basically all over Texas, but we focus in the Houston area. And we've been here for almost 25 years. We initially started our nonprofit, Anna and I working on our own. We had jobs and then we were doing this additionally. And at one point we just decided to make this a full-time issue because it needs to be addressed. You can't do it part-time and get any results. And we found out actually that even working full-time, it's hard to get results. Things don't happen just automatically overnight. But anyway, what we have been doing over the years is identified EJ communities, and then we gone into those communities and try to help them with their struggles. And part of this dealing with the struggles is that Houston is 52 miles stretch of nothing but chemical and refinery plants. Not one right after the next, but at least in a sequence, a huge sequence of 52 miles long. So there's a lot of issues here. And what we've been doing over the years is trying to organize the entire base from Houston to Galveston Bay, which is a task in itself because there's a lot of industries and there's a lot of communities. And the other thing is that, and I'm going over a lot of stuff because I don't know how much time I have, but also in our state is very pro-industry, just like in Louisiana. I heard the gentleman speaking about Cancer Alley. Well, Houston is just as bad. It's Region 6 EPA, even Region 6 EPA is very lax. They let the state do whatever it wants to do. And because we are considered the belly of the beast, the petrochemical area of the United States, we're the largest petrochemical, second to Arabia. And so it makes it very difficult for communities to really organize and really get involved with the issues. Because politically, we don't have the support either, not even from our elected representatives representing those districts that are impacted severely. But just to let you know what I'm doing right now in DC is, and we hope that this is the beginning of a change in how we address environmental justice issues. Congressman Grijalva and Representative McKishin and 7 other representatives of the House were present today. And they invited us to participate in other EJ groups to introduce a House bill addressing environmental justice issues. And this bill actually, it'll be better than the executive order that was passed in 1994 by President Clinton. Because executive orders, as you know and we know, it's basically recommendations that they recommend that states and counties should abide by in good faith dealing with environmental justice issues or just in general environmental issues. But those executive orders, they have a place in the I guess progress of moving forward, because it does take a lot of years to actually document what's going on, and then actually to have legislation that will support the challenges that you make for the industry. So this House bill that is going to be introduced, what it's going to do is it's going to give the environmental justice teeth. Where when we file against an industry, it actually has the support of codified law, a law that is written to address the issues that we're talking about. Again, that's different from the executive order. We can address issues, but they don't have to respond. So this House bill hopefully will help literally hundreds and millions of people impacted by what we call environmental justice or environmental injustice. So that's what we're doing right now. And it's taken a long time, and at least in our history in working with environmental issues, to even get to this step. So we think that this is a significant step that the House of Representatives and others are taking now to seriously address the concerns of communities who for too long have been silenced by the industry, again, especially here in the Houston area, where the industry is very prevalent and can buy off anything that they want, right? Especially our state representatives, and also just convince people that what the business of the industry here is promoting actually economic growth, and people have good, decent paying jobs. And it's hard to counter something like that. But anyway, EJ communities need support, and we need to establish some ground bases to addressing this, you know, not only here, but in the entire USA. I'll stop there. Unless you ask me a question, I'll answer it.
Great. Thank you so much, Juan. That was terrific. Glad to have you with us and for you to be able to join us amid everything that you're doing in DC, because I realize what's going on in DC today is very important. So thank you so much for finding time to squeeze us in. We'll now transition to question and answer time for all three of our panelists. We've had some people type in questions here on the side. Kyle asks, how do you all think that the involvement of communities of faith has helped or hindered your present day condition, and how do you see their involvement moving forward? So would any of you like to take a first stab at responding to that?
I'll take a first step.
Great.
Definitely the religions and the faiths that are out there supporting the kind of work that we do and documenting the injustices that exist. I believe that all faiths, their primary duty is to make sure that people are respected for life and not abused. And so I think that the mission of all religions is to support humanity in itself. And I think, you know, that's why we have what they call the 10 Commandments, right? So those commandments address actually, you know, our living conditions and how we should be treated as human beings with one another. And I'm also supportive of the fact that, you know, it's other faiths that are also very supportive of climate change, such as the Pope, he issued an encyclical on climate change. And the message that we're trying to do, I'm Catholic, so I'm trying to, at least from that point, we're trying to work with the Catholic churches and Catholic dioceses in Texas to implement in their own communities some kinds of, you know, rules, regulations, or projects that they can start addressing environmental justice issues and just environmental issues in general. And that's a mandate, you know, climate change is coming. And again, I encourage that anyone of faith realizes that, you know, this world was made for us as human beings to have dominion over everything. So we need to also be careful in how we express this dominion, right? Over just things that are going on, and realize that in order for this world to survive and human beings to survive, we need to address the negative parts of, you know, what we call progress, right? And countries that are being developed. So that's what we're dealing with. We're very supportive of all religions that are pushing for environmental justice and climate change and trying to get it to their parishioners.
Great. Thank you so much, Juan. Elizabeth, are you able to work in either Sharon or Robert to see if they have a response?
Yeah, they should be able to speak. Sharon or Robert, if you could unmute yourselves.
Yes. Well, to the question of the support or not that we got, here in St. John the Baptist Parish, there is only one church that has been active in this struggle, and that's the church that I come from, under the pastorship of Reverend Lionel Murphy. We've approached the pastors with very little response. There's no church that's actively supporting us other than the Chapatoulas Chapel. Catholic Charities in New Orleans had been watching us, and they contacted me maybe a year ago and said that they had been watching us, and they wanted to know if we had support from any religious organizations, because they gave us an award and they made donations and they offered their support. Locally in St. John Parish, we don't have any support from religion.
Okay, I would like to say something.
Go ahead.
Okay, in St. James Parish, I can't even get my own pastor. I'm Catholic also, and I tried to talk with him, and he's not supporting me at all. I called him again this morning to try to meet with him. The secretary says she would give him my number and name. So I'm sure whenever she gave the name, he didn't respond. I've been asking him for about a year now to try to help me with this. I went to the bishop in Baton Rouge to talk to him about what's going on, and he said he is friends with the governor, and he would talk to the governor, but he haven't gotten back with me on that either. And none of the Baptist church in St. James is trying to help me. I've been trying to reach out to them, talking to them. One pastor said he was going to talk to me. I talked to his wife, and she said she would set up a meeting with me. I haven't gotten that. I called her again. She won't answer the phone. And my understanding is that a lot of those pastors take donations from industry, from leaders in the parish, whenever they have their pastor's anniversary. So it's hopeless over here with me getting the church to help me. We have one pastor over here named Reverend Jones. He has a church, and he always let me use his church. He don't ever turn me down. But as far as him speaking out about the industry, he will not speak out about it. So I pray that they get on board with me, because once I get the pastors on board, I believe it'll be pretty good, because they would talk to their congregation, and the congregation would, most of them listen to their pastors. So that's what I'm praying, that I could speak to some of the pastors. Maybe later on they might get on board. I don't know.
Sharon, thanks so much for that honest response, and Robert as well. Yes, it's I'm having my own Ash Wednesday moment here, wishing that we would all become converted to what needs to be done for justice and turn in the right direction. Due to time, I want to move us on to our next question. We've got a lot of questions that have come on here. One question is, are there conversations about reparations emerging in your communities? If the government and policy fails, what are you planning to do?
I probably can respond to that. There is no even, they won't even consider any conversations about reparations here. None of the so-called leaders, government or otherwise, they are, in my opinion, they are anti-reparations, and I'm talking about the black leaders. St. John the Baptist Parish is a majority black parish. And the leaders here won't even consider. Well, we've had a recent election, and there are some people that I haven't actually got to interact with yet. But for the last 20 years, no, they won't even think about reparations. They refuse to consider it. They won't talk about it.
Thank you for that response, Robert. Any other responses before we move to the next question?
The same thing in this parish, in St. James also.
We had one question pop up, which I know Sharon, definitely you, and maybe you as well, Robert, can respond to, but it's just wondering if you all have connected with the Poor People's Campaign. Sharon, would you like to speak to that first?
Yes, we have connected with the Poor People's Campaign. In fact, the Poor People's Campaign is going to come to St. John Parish and St. James Parish on April 9th. We're gonna come to we're gonna march toward the grave site in St. James, and we're going to try to go to the governor in Baton Rouge. And we're supposed to have some other leaders that's going to come with Reverend Barber. So I'm looking forward to that.
Great, great. Would it be helpful to put a call out for people to come and join you on that day?
Can you hear me? Hey, Bruce, can you hear me?
It certainly would.
You can hear me?
Great. Yep.
Can you hear me, Bruce?
Did you want to chime in?
Yes, on the issue of, this, what you saw, reparations, the environmental justice policy has it's also targeting what we call historical legacy issues. And it's referring, to Superfund sites, to toxic dump yards, landfills. And so we hope that in this new administration of this new policy that we are preparing, that reparation is a part of it. How we going to actually make it work? It's sort of a working tool right now, but that is on their agenda too. How do we go with historical legacy? We know about the poor people's pancake campaign. I said pancake campaign, but no, we haven't heard from them. We know they are actively also working on issues. And then one last thing I wanted to do on the previous question is that one of our first funders here locally in Houston was actually the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. That's it.
Great, great. Thank you for all of those responses. We've got a couple of different types of questions that have come up. The first question I'll mention, there's some questions kind of just about what your strategic approach is like, whether or not you believe in kind of direct action, putting your bodies on the line, or if you see a different approach as being more effective. Would any of you like to speak on that?
Well, I guess I could speak on that. What we here in the river parishes did, we formed a coalition of organizations from New Orleans and up and down the communities between New Orleans and Baton Rouge. And we here in St. John had long taken the position that we were prepared to do that. We did. We picketed DuPont. We went to the schools. We boycotted the school. There are 3 schools within a half a mile of that plant, 2 elementary schools and the high school. And we marched, we picketed. We had a 5-day march from 5th Ward Elementary School in Reserve. For 5 days, we marched up the river to Baton Rouge to the governor's. And of course, he ignored us. And then we did it again. We did a 15-day march where people actually started marching in New Orleans, and we went all the way to Baton Rouge, 15 days. Of course, the governor and everybody ignored us. So we're prepared to do whatever, and in our frustration now and impatience, we're desperate to find methodologies and better strategies on how to approach this.
Juan, did you want to take a response to that?
Yes, sir. What we've done with the direct action, obviously, is we have protested some permits that, Houston is, again, the headquarters to most of the gas and oil industry. Their headquarters are locally based here. So that is actually something that's very important to us, because when this industry wants to do something, they're here and we can go and protest. So we've done that, those types of protests with Sierra Club, with Earth Justice, and with other groups that come down here and help us protest. In fact, one of those protests was against Sharon Company quite a few years ago. And 5 of us ended getting locked up, just for sitting on the steps of Sharon. They picked us up and they locked us up for protesting. And fortunately back then, all they did was, they took us to the courthouse. They charged us with trespassing, and then let us go. But now things are different. Now if you protest, you can get charged with a felony in our state, a 15-year felony charge, where you can, be charged with that. So things are changing as far as protests. It's actually discouraging protests, so people are very reluctant to actually get out there and do that. We've also protested with the Keystone Pipeline, and when we did those protests in fighting against the Keystone Pipeline, we found out maybe a year after that we were listed on a local terrorist potential. So when they put you on those kind of lists, no, we're not terrorists. We're just trying to defend our situation, right? And make our community just as good as any other community. So to be labeled, and most of us that are doing EJ work right now, probably some of them don't know it, but we are probably all labeled as home terrorists, and that they should be on the lookout for individuals like that. So protesting, while it's been good, the criminality of it that has been charged against individuals for protesting is getting more severe and stricter. So we've got to figure out among ourselves and with politicians, where is this nation going to actually, that it is no longer permissible to voice your opinion on public policy or public regulations or public situations that we're placed on because of the government. And if we just let it go too far, what's going to happen? And I don't say that we have to act like idiots and do something drastically, but if we don't pay attention to it before long, we will not be able to do any protest or question any governmental policies, because it'll make it so difficult for ordinary citizens to protest, which is their perfectly right to do, but those rights are slowly being chipped away. So we are concerned about that, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a very important issue when it comes to getting even public support to support our issues, because they're afraid. They don't want to participate in anything that is going to be illegal according to this USA government policies.
Thank you so much, Juan. Elizabeth, I'm thinking that now's a good time for us to transition to the final part of our where we focus on things that people can do. We're beginning a lot of questions, people saying in one form or another, what can I do? What can we do to be supportive? We're also getting comments here. The number of people I think would be big fans if any of the three of you ran for office. You would have some campaign supporters, I think. But right now, what can faith communities in particular do? Elizabeth, do you have anything that you want to kind of kick off or start that conversation with as we explore that together?
Oh, go ahead.
We're having trouble hearing you, Elizabeth.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you. I took myself on mute, so internally here. So I just wanted to build off on what the question was earlier, and I wanted to thank Robert, Juan, and Sharon to speak so honestly about the lack of support from local churches. And many of us are connected to different faith traditions where I think we can do particular work as well to change that dynamic. And so I was curious with our speakers, if you would, given that many of us are in the national context in different locations, what can we do as people of faith to be in solidarity with you?
Well, you can put the word out. Things that you're doing like this, continue doing it and bring it to the public's attention, whatever way you can get it out there, get the message out there to the people. Talk to the churches for us, as we can't seem to get them on board with us. That would be a help.
Sure.
Thank you, Sharon.
And do other thoughts?
Yeah, me, Juan.
Go ahead.
Yes, Juan.
First of all, one thing that as a community and people that deal with AJ issues is that we can really support the policy, this legislative bill that is just going to be introduced, which is, environmental justice for all. We need folks to contact their local representatives and encourage them to support that piece of legislation, because again, it will make it will codify an executive order and actually give it some teeth. So that would be one thing that we ask of you. And also I would like to tell the folks in St. James that I actually started doing environmental justice work in St. James Parish, fighting the Shintak facility. And we were successful in that campaign where Formosa and Shintak finally decided that they would not build right there in St. James Parish. And I see that now repeatedly, it seems like industry is going into St. James Parish, obviously because it's an African-American low-income community, and they think they can get away with murder, right? So I'm glad that they're fighting. And as far as what can we all do to support each other, one is, of course, we need to support each other, not only financially when we can, but we need to back you up on your issue, you know, sign petitions or go to your community and tell you how we fought the issues and what helped us get to those issues. So there's many things that can be done. It's just always a matter of resources and time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Robert?
Yeah, I'm really, we're still just in a process of trying to develop new strategy and new strategies. So other than when I look at when I look at the background here with religion, we know Louisiana is got just about the highest concentrations of Catholics. I grew up. This is a very Catholic community. The Catholic Church is about 1,500 feet. They're next door neighbors. The elementary school that I went to is right adjacent to Fifth Ward Elementary School. And the Black Catholic Church that we, the people in this community right here, we built that church. We created the Our Lady of Grace Catholic Church. The rest of the parish, predominantly the Protestant churches, are Baptist. And in the Black community outside of Reserve, they are predominantly Baptist in the parish, the entire parish. And it's just for some reason we cannot get any support from these people who've been here. I've known the most of the pastors I know, I've known them all my life. They're from here. They are children and grandchildren, and as myself, my great-grandchildren who are being exposed to this. I'm at a loss as to why the church is ignoring this. It's turning their backs on their children, on their this is their congregation. And so I was hoping that maybe we could talk and work out something to where maybe some input from organizations like this one, we might be able to take to these churches. And hopefully, I don't know, I'm at a loss really for how to approach this. I'm still so puzzled. I can understand the politicians being bought out. I cannot believe that all of these Black preachers, but up and down the parish, Sharon's having the same problem. And obviously, I don't see any in the whole issue of environmental justice or injustice or the problem that's going on in what they call Death Alley. There are no preachers, there are no pastors, there are no churches that's taking a lead. The pastor at our church, he's considered an outcast. I think that's terrible, simply because he's supporting us. So I don't know really. I'm at a loss as to what we should do. And I would welcome any suggestions or recommendations or advice that you guys might have to help us work out a solution to this.
Thank you so much. I think that is such a powerful witness to all of us who are here from various faith traditions to really take that to heart in terms of what is our responsibility as people of faith to be in solidarity. And will we choose to take our access, our connections, our finances, our time to really to be in solidarity? So thank you for that. I think we have a task to do that is before us. I also want to affirm that with the UCC's report, I'm not sure, Brooks, if you were going to do that, but the policy advocacy toolkit that I found along with the report that really gives a number of actions that we can do both at the federal level, but really in sharing the word, right? Whether that's organizing a town hall, an information session, social media, writing a letter to the op-ed, et cetera. So I think those are some things that we can do to amplify what has been shared with our speakers today. And so that, you know, maybe when we connect again in a year or two, you can say, actually, faith communities have shown up, finally, right? And instead of this reality right now, where the paucity of our presence and support for your reality that all of you are going through right now. So thank you so much.
Hey, I was going to comment on that too.
Go ahead.
Right? What we believe is that this is not a Catholic issue. It's not a Baptist issue. It's not a Protestant issue. It's an issue that affects all religions, regardless of what faith you believe in. And I think that somehow we do have to make a connection that, you know, we need to work together because our faiths may separate us, but our issues do not, you know, because if it's contamination, it's going to contaminate all of us. So somehow, I believe that has been worked on, where more religions are working together to address common issues that have nothing to do with, you know, your faith, but has to do with just humanity and how we need to deal with those issues. So I just wanted to say that because when we start talking about religions, yes, a lot of people are divided by that, but most people impacted by environment are starting to unite and saying, look, we all have a common destiny here, either to save the world and save ourselves, or no matter what faith you are, you know, you're gonna just lose in the end. So there is collaboration among religions that I'm aware of, and I encourage those relationships to just continue to grow and build, because we need everybody at the table together and not saying, well, Catholics are doing this, Baptists are doing that, because in the end, you know, we're all in this place together. So that's my position and that's our position. And that's what we always try to do, work with people of color and work with whatever religion you are and whatever beliefs you have, and then try to focus on, yes, okay, now how do we address this? Thank you.
Thank you, Juan.
Listen.
I feel like the message I'm taking away for me personally from this is that this is our opportunity as people who are on this call listening to you. It's our opportunity to embody that spirit of justice and how we live out our faith. And so thank you for giving us these ideas for how to do that. We will continue to look for opportunities to be in solidarity with you. I know in the chat box somebody said we need to turn out for April 9th and put out a call for that march that is happening in Cancer Alley. So we will put together resources that have been mentioned in this call, and we will put that in an email, and we'll share a YouTube version of this webinar. I know there's a church in Billings, Montana that gets a group together to watch these webinars, something I never thought would happen. And so we're just grateful, you know, for all of you and for what you do to help spread the word and to share information and to get people involved and engaged in these critical issues of creation justice and environmental justice. So thanks everybody. Thank you, Elizabeth, for being a terrific co-host. So great to be with all of you, and a special thanks to our three panelists for today, Juan, Robert, and Sharon. You all are terrific. I admire you greatly, and you're an inspiration. Thank you.